Hello and welcome to Lead a Horse to Water, the equine training and behaviour podcast. And today, again, I'm so lucky to be joined by Katrina, who was on, I think, 2 or 3 possibly episodes ago now. So say hi, Katrina.
Hello.
And we are going to go through some of your questions. Some come from the podcast that we did together. Others are just some questions that have popped up on previous episodes that I haven't covered yet. I'm doing all my housekeeping, getting all this done at once. So we're going to go first. And if you want to know about Katrina, you just have to go back to her episode and check out what I said about her there. She's awesome. So one of Katrina's students, which is why obviously I wanted her back on to answer this one, Paige, has asked a question. I'm going to read this out to you. So, as a student of Katrina's, I love her insight with training horses. Me too. I own a hunter who loves to jump. We lost our way a little bit and she helped us rebuild along with my other coaches. I'd love to hear her talk about issues with how hunter horses specifically are trained in the balance and why it leads to soundness issues, making the horse appear of less quality over time, etc. Right, I'm going to start by saying you're going first on this one because and to translate for the English people, the European side of things, hunt is big over your side
In North America.
pond,
Yeah.
and we would put that in the same category as a showing class that we have here, which is a hunter class here. So, where you would go in and jump some smaller fences than you would in show jumping, but maybe more natural, which I'm assuming is similar to
Yeah.
what you guys do. Yeah. So you're looking at
And
rustic
it's
poles and hedges and stuff.
and I would say it's a little different than the show hunters in the sense of the balance and the frame. So maybe it would be good for us to discuss those two differences as well. I'm not English, so I can't speak to English riding, but I know a little bit about show hunters, and it's definitely more of a put together frame. So the horse is a bit more round on the bit, moving quite traditionally in that frame, that outline.
Yeah.
In the hunter world in North America, you're looking for a horse who's a little flatter, who travels with flat knees, who is not on the bit, who has his nose poked in front of the vertical and is very long. So you're looking for a really long, flowy picture, as if you were just watching somebody gallop along in the field and they jump some sticks.
Okay.
And so that's sort of the picture. And then you want over the fence for the horse to have a very square kneed, even jump, their nose nice and low, and you want them to jump with quite a bit of exaggeration. So they tend to take off at a distance further from the fence than, say, a show jumper, where you want to get in really tight, get that snap up, and be really efficient. You're looking for a pretty picture. So that's the hunter world in North America. And Paige's question is really interesting because with, and I don't think she'll mind me saying this, but with her horse, she's a beautiful horse, stunning horse. And over time, his jump had started to degrade and his quality of gaits had started to degrade. And being the observant and wonderful person that she is, she gave me a call and said, hey, this is upsetting. My horse is getting sore. He's not moving like he used to. And what is the problem? And so we went and took a look, and a lot of it has to do with a lack of, I think, understanding an antecedent arrangement about how to build the behavior that you want over time rather than working from the picture backwards. And so in, I think, any sport, it doesn't matter which discipline you're in, people have a habit of riding the horse to the finished picture rather than building the horse to the finished picture. And if you're starting at the end and you want it to look like the end, and that's the only thing that you do, you're not going to build up a full athlete. And in the case of hunters, you have horses who are not actually set up to be forward off the leg or to be quick off the leg or to understand balance between the shoulders, because they're in that position that is low, long, and slow. But low, long, and slow doesn't build up power or quickness or balance on the hindquarters. And so I think it's just a matter of misunderstanding that you can train multiple positions and not lose your end picture. You could still work towards the end picture while having a horse who's very gymnastically worked in all sorts of other positions. And so I think, to go back to Paige's question, that really low, long frame with the stretchy jump and the nose in front of the vertical is not inherently bad. There's nothing wrong with it. I think it's just that if you only do that, then you have a problem. Much like if you only ride a horse in a collected frame, you have a problem.
Yeah.
Or if you only ride your horse on the trail, you have a problem. But that's my, I think,
that
I hope
makes
that
a lot
covers
of
some
sense.
things.
So we're thinking about the fact that people aim for that posture for the posture's sake, because that's what wins. So you need to
Yes.
do that. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere. Understandable. We get that.
Yeah.
But actually, what we would be better doing is, as we would in dressage, moving around frames within every session and making it clear to the horse through setting up our antecedent setup being such that we can say, oh, okay, working on an 8-meter vault puts you in this position that's a lot lighter and up and carried. Working on the buckle in trot will put you in that posture, and we can call those different things for you so that you know what the difference is. But it's basically that you need all those postures and everything in between, like hacking up hills if you have hills, and doing a little bit of jumping, even if it's cross poles, even if that's not your thing. Maeve's here. Maeve's joined the podcast for anyone who's watching. She's just the cutest. So not dissimilar to that we would do in everything that we do with our horses. We're creating a framework that the horse can grow in, but you're saying that because the horse doesn't necessarily do that with Hunter, that it is difficult then. So look, tell us what you did to help Paige. Would that help us explain how we could move forwards from those things when we're training? Because it wouldn't necessarily just be Hunt that we would have this problem. If you have a dressage horse and you just come out in collection all the time, you are going to have a problem, aren't you?
Yeah. And it's interesting. So with her horse in particular, what we worked on a lot was getting him in a better balance so that he could go forward. Because what we were running into was a lot of leg needed, and I say needed in air quotes, but a lot of leg needed to have this horse motivated enough to actually move enough to be able to jump well. And a lot of that was that he was in the wrong balance to be able to move well off the leg. And so that leg cue had been really poisoned because you were having to nag and nag and nag and hope and hold to get this horse to really move freely under her. And so we played a lot with the parallel pulls, shifting the balance and asking him to move forward in a different posture, and setting up a back chaining exercise so that the horse would come to another point and stop and then get a scritch and a break at a cookie. And the combination of back chaining and reestablishing the balance helped us reestablish our leg cue. And just doing that was enough to really transform this horse's attitude around the work and made it much more pleasant for him to move around. And then the quality of his gaits improved tremendously, because without that first piece, you can't work on anything else. And I think it's where a lot of those horses falter, is that they're in a balance that doesn't encourage go. And if you have a horse in a balance that is very down and relaxed and pokey, which is lovely for so many things, it doesn't elicit the response of my leg goes on and it means that you go. And it's just not set up in that arrangement. And so you have a lot of horses who don't really understand the leg. They don't have a cue for the leg. The cue for go is more context than it is anything else. It's almost like it's on a timer. After the 10-minute warm up, suddenly they go.
We're going to go.
And it's almost as if the leg is on a timed cue rather than it's not really a cue. It's more of like a environmental thing, or the jumps come up and then they go.
And no, that makes absolute sense. When you're here and you see you're in this situation, then you do the thing, and that's why it gets flatter and flatter, and less of a proper cue aid. And it's interesting because I answered this morning. I recorded some answers to the webinar that I did last week, and one of those questions was, do I click after every single time? Do I drop off the food? Do you just stop everything once the cue is learned? And of course my answer was, I drop the cue off, but I might be doing other things like sequencing and training things, but also every so often I'm going to come back in and tidy things up, sharpen things up, because if I don't, they do degrade. It doesn't matter who you're training, whether it's a human. So humans on the start of a race, if it's a sprint, there's so much technique in the start. If they're not practicing that all the time, they've got nothing. And I think it's the same with us. We need to go in and kind of just smarten up again some of those things, do a bit of off cue work, like cue work, so that the horse is really going, I guessed it, it's this. And, we've seen it with Samwise. He just gets so like, I've got the thing, I've got it, I got the memo. And it is so good to see that enthusiasm. So yeah, that ties in really well with that question, which I only surface answered, but that's even more information on that as well. Yeah.
And I think too, when you start to understand longitudinal balance, which is that front to back long versus high balance, and you start to realize which positions elicit which behaviors, you can put those on cue much easier. Because if you're trying to work from a posture that isn't likely to elicit the behavior that you want, you're unlikely to be able to get anything without increasing all of your pressure. And so if you want everything to stay really nice, especially if you're using negative reinforcement as your primary quadrant from which you're training, you have to be really clever about your positional antecedent arrangements. Otherwise, you're going to end up in a fight every time. And I don't think you need to go there.
No,
regardless of whether you put a cookie at the end or not.
Yeah, but you don't need to. You wear it out. You sort of use it so much that, because the process of negative reinforcement, the horse moves from something they find, I'm going to use the word, people keep avoiding, oh no, what I do isn't aversive. Well, we wouldn't be getting more behavior if it wasn't. So either your training's a bit rubbish and you're not really using negative reinforcement, or it's aversive, one or the other. You can't have it both ways. So I'll be honest in what it is. It doesn't mean you're beating your horse at all. It just means it's, like a horse will swish their tail for a fly. It just means they're swishing their tail. It's just like, okay, I'll do the thing you've told me. Yeah. But if we then get sloppy, me going in and tidying it up with positive reinforcement is just so much easier. And that's why I think it's a bit of a no-brainer. That was another question I had that I answered after the webinar directly, and somebody said, do I have an aversion to negative reinforcement, and isn't well applied negative reinforcement absolutely fine? And really well, non-escalating negative reinforcement for most people would, and for most horses would, make their world so much better. But that's not the reality for most people. So, the idea that it is just, for me, and
I think fundamentally it's a misunderstanding of how training works. It's not really, I think it's before quadrants. It's like prior to even talking about how you might apply the training. It's a fundamental misunderstanding in what training is and isn't, and what building behaviors is and isn't, and what a behavior is and isn't. And if you can't break down your problem into a single unit of behavior and then figure out how to teach that, and to think about things really backwards, much like we talked about in our last podcast together, you can't really even go into the discussion about negative reinforcement or positive punishment or positive reinforcement, because you haven't got the base to talk to each other about it. And so it's like, as much as the quadrants really help us define where we're working from, I think you have to have more knowledge before you can even go there. And I think horse people skipped that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, but I do also think there's that pushback. We spoke a little bit, I suppose,
absolutely,
about that pushback of what I've been doing. I'm not hurting my horse. No, nobody's saying you're hurting.
Nobody said you're hurting your horse.
We just got better ways. Come join the positive gang, because we can really unpick training, and then you can go back if you have to and apply it to your negative reinforcement, which isn't the end of the world. But
no, and I think there's ways, it's a matter of changing how you think about the training question more than it is about how you're reinforcing your behavior routine, right? It's so much more about just actually understanding the concept. It sounds so simple when you say, well, don't put your leg on if the horse isn't going to go, because then it just isn't going to work. But to do that in practice requires a complete shift in how we ride. It requires a complete shift in how you think about the problem. So for me, it's even, join the positive club, but also
also do negative better. I remember years ago, that was always what I first did with new clients, was if their horse didn't move without naggy legs, I would say, put your leg on and take it off. Really take your leg off first. Off, touch, off again. Well, nothing will happen. Well, let's see. And the horse kind of dropped its weight a little forward. Oh, good boy. Okay, now try again. The horse thinks, maybe I could walk a step. Oh, well done, clever boy. And amazingly, once you cleared the blackboard of all the rubbishy scribble that all the kids had done in the meantime, and just made it really clear that, so negative reinforcement can be done better. But we know that. sort of preaching to the choir a bit here, aren't we, everybody?
Yeah.
So I'm going to go to another question, because I think that's great what you said about Paige, and I think we can apply that to every single thing we do, whether you're a show jumper, an eventer. And I'm really hoping that some of these people who are, you know, sort of not necessarily at the top echelon of sport, but are doing sport in a competitive way where they leave home and go and do it. I hope people would like to get involved and talk more about it, and maybe join us on the podcast one day and talk about it, because I think it's important that we start looking at it. Otherwise, the grassroots people are going to overtake the icons and the gurus in their sports, because they will know everything and the top end won't. But anyway, a question that I had on a previous podcast, which was, what does giving a horse choice in training look like to you? And why is it important? And then the second part to that question, how do you balance offering choice to the horse with the need for clear boundaries and structure in training? I love this question because I love the opportunity kind of to answer it. So I would say that for me, giving a horse choice in training means that I'm not going to ask for the answer at all costs. So I might go in, tinker with my environment, play with my antecedent setup. If the behavior I think that was going to go, yeah, here I am, doesn't arrive, I'm going to go, okay, just want to go and eat some food on the side of the arena, or, you know, stand there and eat some hay while I do something else and see if that works. I mean, it's a lot deeper than that, but just on a surface level, that's kind of how I feel about choice, that it becomes I'll listen if you don't want to do it, and I will notice when you say yes. So it's the yes and the no. It's not just the no. I think for me that's important. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think choice is a complicated topic because there's a philosophical argument for choice. I don't know how down the rabbit hole we want to go. But I think in the context of training, choice is convoluted because one, you have to define what choice is or isn't. And two, I think maybe a better word would be opt in or opt out from the activity rather than choice. And I say that from a really philosophical standpoint, more and really pedantic standpoint. But I struggle with the concept of choice because what is choice?
I think it's good. I think this is you can go down that rabbit hole, but just to kind of qualify that with, I do teach a course on cooperative care, and I'm not massively fond of the word cooperative. I think it's possibly better that we look at that as the horse being able to tolerate something. You know, they're opting to tolerate what you need to do, because when I go to the dentist or the hairdressers, I'm not choosing. It's like circumstances say I need to go, and I will go and tolerate it. So yeah, I'm with you. But we use these buzzwords kind of, and it makes everyone feel like, oh, I'm giving my horse choice. But it is a complex. It's very, you know, and if we went into the degrees of freedom conversation, you know, it gets really deep.
Nitty gritty. And so I was like, how far do we want to dive into this? But I think in terms of choice and training, what I'm looking at when I'm working with horses is, are they still engaged in the activity? Are they looking like they're trying to participate? Is my food eating, is it the way the horse eating the food still within normal limits? Is the horse spending more time gazing into space than they had previously? Is my latency increasing? Is my arousal increasing over normal limits? And looking at all of those factors and taking into consideration when I need to change something. And I think that is more, like, to me, that's more in line with the question, like what the question's really getting at, than how do I give my horse a choice? Because sometimes there isn't really an option, right? And I think there's some R+ trainers that get a little bit too caught up in the concept of absolutely the horse must opt in for everything, when there's certain welfare situations or certain emergency situations where there is no choice. And so you have to build that resilience in somehow, and it's best to do it within a positive reinforcement framework over time, rather than to suddenly change your whole program, force the horse to do the thing, and then have massive fallout. So I think there's a balance there, and it's tricky. and I see it in dogs and in horses. There's quite a few really kind-hearted positive reinforcement people with dogs whose nails are infinitely too long and problematic because they don't want to put their dog in an uncomfortable position to clip their nails, which is completely legitimate. Like, that argument is legitimate. And also you have a welfare issue, a nail that's significantly too long that you can't get done. And so there's this balance of like, where's choice, right? Where does the human need to step in and make a decision to have the animal be uncomfortable for the betterment of the animal's entire welfare? So I think it's a really complex question. I'm not sure if the question asker knew how complex this question was.
No, I
and
think
how
not.
philosophical this question was.
Yeah, I think coming from it in a more kind of, because I often talk about choice on the podcast and how choice and control often gives the learner more confidence to offer more in future. And how can that be a thing?
Yeah.
And I think for me, there are a couple of obvious places. What do they look like when you bring the tack out? So if there's something way back there, there's always a choice not to do it. It doesn't feel comfortable as a rider for your horse to say, and I have a lovely client who, we've had some difficult conversations about, today maybe we're not going to ride because the horse is clearly saying, I can't today. And you have to take that. And if you take that, then you often find that the horse goes, oh, actually today I feel I might not be 100%, but I'm up for it. And that's fine. It gives you that ability. So for me, choice begins with, do they want to come in to the area that they know they tack up in before they go train? Do they willingly walk to the place that you want to train? If you're riding, do they willingly walk up to the mounting block with you? Is there anything that's saying that they're not? So I'm not going to be actually building choice into that. I'm listening to their choice.
Right.
I'm listening to their behavior and going to, sort of return the compliment. If you want to talk to me in small language, like not bucking me off, and you give me the look that says, or you come to the mounting block, but instead of a 90 degree, you are, sticking your bum out or your shoulder out and I can't actually get on. What are you telling me? So I think it's those in a simple language.
It's listening to their signals, listening to the opt-out signals more than it is about presenting the horse with an A or a B. I think is more important. I mean, if you want to get into like letting your horse pick which treats you're going to work with, I think that's fun. I don't know if there's any real benefit to it in the long run, but it's kind of a fun, it's a fun exercise.
Apart from your horse wanting to choose the ones that are really too exciting, and that can be problematic. But offering that sort of choice, I think, is really good. And it can start there where your horse gets to choose some really simple things like that. You might have two identical not identical, because then there wouldn't be any choice, two different setups for different behaviors that the horse could perform, and they get to choose. So we know that Samwise would go to the parallel poles every time, but he might have some conflict now about, if there's a mat or parallel poles, what do I want to do today? So choice can be as simple as that. You might do, you get to do that one first, then we'll do the other one, then you can go back, do your favorite again. So, you can build some amount of choice in.
And one of the other things that I like to use choice for, at least with my horses, is with blankets. I don't tend to blanket very heavy or a lot, but I will often present the blanket as an option. And sometimes it's quite clear that they're like, yes, I would like a blanket. And other times it's like, no, I don't want that thing anywhere near me. And I always listen to that. And I don't panic about like, oh, it's cold and windy out. And nobody's died yet.
I think to be not a bad choice. Things are super hard for horses because they don't know the weather forecast. So I'm always sort of like, like you say, there are times when you have to override the choice because you know more information than them. Nevertheless, so for me, we've heard what Katrina thinks, what I think. That's what choice is to us. Why is it important? Well, I think it's important because if you're going to have any sort of communication with another being, surely you want it to be two-sided. So listening is basically, you're offering choice. Now, if you want to offer even more choice, that could look like, if you went all the way down to Gold Diamond and looked at, degrees of freedom, and you can offer me this behavior or no behavior. You're still going to get the reinforcer because that's how we roll. And again, people would say, oh no, my horse wouldn't do it. He'd just keep opting to do nothing and get paid for it. It's just surprising, but they don't, they really don't.
Can I share with you an anecdote?
Yeah, do. I love them.
Early on in my transition from traditional to R+, very early on, I had this horse that I was working with who was really, really grumpy in the cross ties, like really angry, didn't like to be brushed. And I had always been taught, and this is like very ingrained in me, like beforehand, the before times, that if the horse was moving away from the object, that you just kept the object on the animal until they stopped moving and then you removed it. And I had this moment of, I'm pretty sure I'm going to get kicked in the head if I try this. And so I went, there's this other weird technique where you just don't touch them if they start being funny. And I was like, oh, this is going to be so bad. Like the behaviors are going to increase like crazy, but nobody's in the barn and no one's going to yell at me. So I tried it. And this horse, who was really quite rank, like really awful, softened up within 5 minutes, and I was able to brush him everywhere. And everyone thought it was crazy, but nobody would have believed the technique that I had used, which was a really constructional approach of removing the brush in that moment, letting the horse decide whether or not he was okay with me approaching, and like working from that angle. And it blew my mind that didn't reinforce the bad behaviors in quotation marks. And that you could do that. And I think if you look at choice within that sort of context, like if you look at it within that framework, it'll be more successful. And I think the horses benefit infinitely. And it was really my first taste of, I need to shift my perspective.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great anecdote. And I mean, I think we probably through our lives have lots of them. And that's good because it keeps reinforcing us for the belief that it actually works. But I think for me, I can honestly say that all of the horses that I've worked with successfully, we haven't retired them or, they've been injured and they can't really come back, that offering some amount of choice, as we've mentioned here, not the deeper choice, but just that listening to, are you not up for this today, has resulted in more behavior offered in future. Not the one you don't want, not the putting the brakes on and not wanting to do something. And I think that is so important for people to understand. And like you say, it goes against everything we grew up knowing. And I think for children as well. And, I found this stuff when my own child was quite young, and probably I applied it badly, but I was always trying to apply the idea that if you want to do it, it will be lots better than if I want to do it. It's a struggle, whether it's people or animals, because you've got this voice over your shoulder of the world saying, oh, but we have to do it. We must do this. You have to conform to this, which kind of hopefully brings us round. I didn't intend to. I'm not that clever. How do you balance offering choice to the horse with the need for clear boundaries and structure in training?
I think it's your clever setups. It's what you have to think about, which options are you allowing and why are you allowing them? It's sort of like to go back to a kid example. It's not, do you want to stay at home and eat candy bars versus let's go to school? It's, do you want to wear this pair of shoes or this pair of shoes to go to school? And I think that's the difference, is like figuring out what choice is and what choices are actually reasonable or available within that context, rather than here's all of your choices. Go into the field and run around with your friends and get muddy and eat grass, or come into the barn and be ridden in a dressage test, is not really, that's not going to work in anyone's favor. But if it's, do you want this brush or this brush? I think it's a much nicer
definitely
way to frame it. Like it's your setups. It's how you set it up. It's what choices are you going to offer and why, and what is the consequence if the horse opts out.
Yeah. And I think also it's listening to, if they opt out, why did they opt out? So if turning left at the end of the center line is a problem, we ask ourselves, why is it? If I set it up differently, if I make it more attractive, if I put a reinforcement point just after turning left, and I do it all that way and I get no change, why am I not getting the change? So the horse isn't saying I won't go that way, but they're saying that way's hard. And so it's down to us to do some more stuff. So as much as I love structure in my training, it's not necessarily led by, I need to be at this level of this training here and this level here and this level here by these dates. It's about what other things this horse can do. What other things, if I think about dogs, I have a Cocker Spaniel who can do everything. The only thing now holding her back is her age. But, with Sherlock, I have to think, this is going to take a long time, this one. whatever I'm training, this one's going to take a long time. And then you get surprised and it doesn't. And horses are just the same. For some horses, putting all that effort in is absolutely worth it. But you're not going to train in an easy one after the other, going through the scales of training stuff. It's going to be a lot more difficult for you. So that structure and those boundaries. But I think one boundary that does benefit massively from all of this way of training is understanding our space. And, that idea that it's rude to come into your space and flicking the horse out of your space that negative reinforcement uses or punishment uses, I think is poor. I think it's a poor use of our time and effort. Whereas if we train the horse how to be around us by offering a bit of choice, the whole thing's just a lot easier. So I think boundaries is a hard one, but we need them, obviously.
Well, and I think if you don't mind me adding more anecdotes to this,
No.
when we were working with Samwise, who had massive fear responses to things, and then conflict around food, which is when I called you. It's like, I don't know how to introduce food in a way that's going to work for this horse who is so conflicted about coming into my space. The pieces that we worked on, which were really basic, were around food delivery, but specifically having him stand still and wait and know where to stand still and what that meant, and then fading in other behaviors meant that he now had an understanding of what it meant to stand still. And previously because standing still is such a weird behavior, they're not really doing anything. But when you make it a behavior, which is what you did with all the exercises that you gave us, it's made it that is on cue. Like the wait is on cue. The wait is a discrete behavior. The standstill is a discrete behavior. And having that difference between wait and go in the context of really getting it makes it possible for you to do so many other things. And then the idea of boundaries is way less necessary because the horse knows where to stand and how to stand and what that results in. And then there's none of this confusion or conflict between them crowding your space or getting into your space, because that's not a behavior that gives them anything that they need or want.
Yeah.
So it's just taking out all of that conflict. Like you've parsed it out and made it that it is no longer part of the picture. It's no longer part of the question. And I think that's really quite brilliant, to be honest.
Yeah. No, I love that. So they need to know the what and when, but we need to know the why. They don't need to know why. They'll never know why. Doesn't matter.
Right.
But
and I think it's a mistake to go about it the other way around, to say they must understand boundaries and respect. Well, horses are never going to understand boundaries and respect with humans. And the way to flip that around is to go, well, what does that look like? And how do I train that?
Yeah, great.
Which is a really different, it's just flipping it around. And I thought it was really brilliant.
I like that. That's excellent. How can you tell when a horse is no longer responding to a particular reinforcer, and what do you do next?
This is such an interesting question. It kind of ties into our last few, hey?
Yeah, does. Yeah. There's a theme always in these things, I find. So what do we think? So what does it mean? Maybe we should just break down. You break down, how do we know when a reinforcer isn't working anymore?
Well, it's just not reinforcing the behavior.
Yeah, so we see less behavior, and so your cues aren't working and your horse is possibly abandoning the training or abandoning you within the training and going off doing their own thing. That could be, couldn't it? Have you felt this? Have you had this happen?
Have I had it happen in previous lifetimes? Yes. Have I had it happen within my newer context of training? Not so much.
Good.
Maybe more so in dogs than horses for different reasons. But I think it's important to know as a human why your animal is not, like, what happened before this happened. Yeah. So was there an increased amount of latency? Did the animal find the exercise really hard? Was there a lot of reps beforehand? Were there signs of stress or shutting down or anything, or arousal, or all of these things before this happened? Because I think by the time you've come to the point where your animal isn't taking food anymore, or where the food isn't working, or where that's really broken, you've already missed probably 10 or 20 signs before that.
Always.
Which is, and it's, so I'd say that when that does happen, it's time to abandon your plan and reassess what happened beforehand. And if you're videoing, it's a good time to look at your video.
Yeah.
And I don't try to fix that problem in the moment, because it's too late to fix it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not even sometimes it's nothing exciting, like it's nothing that you did wrong. It's that the horse had a huge meal beforehand. They're super full. They've been on grass all day. You pull them out, you're feeding grass, and they're just done with eating grass.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But it's
No,
also,
that's it. And well,
yeah,
we call those motivating operations often, and it
yeah,
is the case, isn't it? So if you're on your third piece of cake for the day, even if cake is your favorite thing, the offer of some more cake or the fact it's on the table is not going to encourage you to do anything else for cake. So at
right.
that point, something more reinforcing could be a drink.
Yeah,
It's hard to use for animals. It's hard to use drink specifically as a reinforcer. But that is the problem that we have, is that those motivating operations, they might be all full up on lovely fresh damp grass. It's the growing season, and you bring along some carrot, which is just probably not that far off similar to sweet young grass, and so you might not get much. But if you change that up for something different, and people are always shocked that their horses preferences change, and they will, depending on what they've had earlier in that
yeah,
session. So yeah, but we're not saying, one thing I really always, I'm not sure if I've ever spoken about this properly on the podcast, but I never want to up my rate of reinforcement or my value of reinforcement because I need the behavior, unless it's an emergency. And then I'm
yeah.
not going to be doing training. I'm just going to be doing emergency stuff. And so
Management
that's
stuff.
absolutely fine. If they can only concentrate for 20 apples worth, I'm going to be doing apples. But I wouldn't want to do that. So if I'm not getting a super lift in my trot transition, I'm not going to swap to apple. It's more fundamental than that. As you just said, all those things that can be wrong because your horse is not in the best place to train that exercise that day, then I think that's when your reinforcer isn't working. So how do we address it? Well, we go back in and we become a bit detective and try and work out those things. So we go back to the simplest exercise that we can do and ask our horse, can you do that? And if they can't do that, then there's something else really wrong going on, don't we?
Oh
That's
no, we've got
trying
a
to
frozen.
completely abandon.
Yeah, there was some freezing going on there in that previous clip, so let me know if we need to go
Okay,
back on it.
yeah, we can tidy it out.
But yeah, I think I think always look at your setup first before you start to change the food. So it's usually not the food that's the problem, it's the setup. And it's usually something to do with the training picture, less to do with the food picture. And I think as humans, it's easy for us to change the food picture, so we want to go there first, but it's not usually the right place to tweak it. So you got to tweak the stuff beforehand. And I think too, like when you're dealing with emotional states, whether it's arousal of over or under, whether it's fear, whether it's anxiety, whether it's a conditioned learned helplessness state in your working environment, all of those pieces play a huge role around food. And so you want to make sure you're not poisoning your food by having these baked in. So it's more important to change the stuff before, because you don't want to have a horse who can't do anything and then you just keep throwing better and better food at them. Like it's not going to change anything.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that, officially it used to be there was play around with your timing, get your timing perfect, get your food right and your value right and your rate of reinforcer right, and everything can be solved. Where we know now that that is not true, but they are still really important. So, it's a great question. But as I think we've said, it goes a lot deeper than the reinforcer. Why is the reinforcer not working? Go back, be a detective. Yeah, okay. I think that will do with that one for now. I love this last one, especially as you are embarking on being a professional dog trainer in not too distant future. What is one advanced training technique from dog trainers that you found useful in your own work with horses? Basically, because I'm always banging on about dog trainers and how brilliant they are and how we horsey people never listened to anything that the dog people said until it was too late, which is not really true. I'd say that a little tongue in cheek. So is there anything like one? I'm not sure there's one. I think just my whole training philosophy
I was going to
is
say,
based on dog training.
when we looked at these questions before we started the podcast, I'm pretty sure I answered this with everything ? Because I've learned so much from the dog world. It's not even funny, but I think one thing that I've really found useful in horses, maybe more than anything else, is the Well, back chaining is one of the ones that is just so much more, it's utilized in every aspect of sport dog training, and it's absolutely not even touched upon in horse sport training. So maybe that can be our pick for today in the sport horse theme. And I think in the broader context, I think the understanding of emotional states and how to work with those states with either an on-ramp or an off-ramp or like an abandoned ship plan, it's just much more established as in the group as like, no, we don't work with dogs when they're not in a state to be worked with. We work on the state, we don't work on the training, is so nice because it's just a universal, maybe not universally accepted, but it feels more universally accepted as the right answer, rather than in the horse world where it's seen as really quite radical to really listen to that horse's emotional state. And in the dog world, I feel like it's just normal. Obviously, you don't train a dog who's got issues, but in horses, it's the idea that we can train out the feelings. That's the big piece for me is that one. But the back chaining for sport is also brilliant in terms of like an advanced training technique, if we're talking about technique specifically.
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely go with back chaining. Back sequencing normally for horses, because back chaining technically being a set sequence of events rather than, but everyone calls it back chaining, even if it is sequencing. But I'm a bit of a pedantic idiot with things like that. So yeah, I think back sequencing, or if you have got things like opening a gate or picking up feet, a back chain is absolutely great for that too. I think that's probably for me. But I also think that ability to get into the reinforcement routine and leverage it, because we're like, yeah, change the value. We just said it in the last question, change the value, change the and everything will be good. No, leverage it, use it, walk to get it, have 4 or 5 different reinforcement routines depending on what you want to do. And I also think one of my favorite things, and it wasn't ever said just for dogs, but the dog people took it and the horse people seemed to not bother too much about it, was Bob Bailey, but probably via his wife Marion, and therefore via Skinner almost directly, that you mark for the behavior you wanted and you feed for the position, i.e. where you want the horse to be next. So, we do this a lot in dog training. Mark it, throw the food so the dog can reset and come back in and start the behavior again. You showed some lovely playing around with mats, playing around. It was awesome training with Samwise the other day. And when you're working on a mat, if you want to reset the behavior or maybe a backup, you do that by using a reinforcement routine that puts the horse back into the original position, and then they can offer it again. So it might be that they walk, they do the behavior, you mark it, they walk a circle and get the food over there, and then they can come back in and reset. I don't think horse people, mostly people say, yeah, I do that, but they don't really. I've not seen many horse trainers using that. And I know it's in people's minds, but I'm just not seeing it much. So, I think that ability to tinker around with the reinforcement routine, everybody is just kind of, well, if I can't click and feed to the mouth, what am I going to do? And, it's kind of just the beginning there.
Well, and I think too, the fact that reinforcement routines are part of the training picture in dogs is also different. Whereas I think a lot of horse people find the reinforcement routine to be some sort of like extra flourish you put on. Or only when you need it. It's not really part of the training. But in dog sports and in dogs in general, like how you feed the food, where you feed the food is training. In fact, it's most of it. And then you just layer on the behaviors that you want in between. And I find that actually very similar to the way that you train horses, is that you are really focused on the reinforcement routine. And then from there, we can build up all of these behaviors. And as a case study of one with me, I can say it works, but it's also just,
I honestly have not had it not work. If the person can do it, then I've never had it not work. Now, we're all at a different stage, and you're a really neat trainer, so it's not a problem for you. But for some people, they're maybe just not there, so I haven't been able to do it for them. But yeah, I think that ability to play around with the reinforcement routine is so nice. It just brings so much definition to your training that I think is missing. But dog people were doing this, like so long ago. And I think the thing with humans and training horses is that we forget that inside is not a bouncy dog that we want to have bouncing around. So you will see dog people train with quite high energy in their dog when they want a high energy behavior. There are people that do that with horses, but I just see a lot of stress. I think there is long term a way to do it that gets that energy without the stress, but I don't think it is at the beginning by getting them all bouncy and look at my horse wanting to do this. Look how he just pushed that fence over to get to me and do the training. I'm always like, oh, my heart is sinking there. So yeah, definitely tinkering around with reinforcement. Also, the thing that we did early on, and I did because I was copying what other people would do. I never had an original idea in my life, I'm pretty sure. So, all these people kindly were doing it ahead of me. I say all, there weren't many in horses, but, there was this real pressure to work on something for like 20, 30 reinforcers without a break, and it was like really refined stuff, and I was really drawn to it to begin with until I saw all the frustrations. So I still love micro shaping, but not in like 1 hour session and doing 5 lots of 10 minutes within that, and just very little in terms of breaks in between. So I think that's what I've learned from the dog people. With my dog, I'll pick up 6 pieces of kibble. Kibble's so exciting in our house. When people say cheese or pate, I'm like, what? My dogs would blow their brains for a piece of cheese or pate. So no, I don't. But, I'll put 6 reinforcers in my hand, and it's quite okay to do that with horses. If you're good enough, pick up 6 from your bucket, do your thing, set one up with the first one, then you get 5 repeats or 4 repeats and the last one's for the bucket to finish. It makes you so smart on your training. It gets you really kind of like, I can only do 4 of these. I've got 1 set up, 1 finish, 4 to train, done. Have a breather, do it again. That's dog people. There's nowhere I got that apart from dog people.
And then can I say, I'm going to flip this question around and say one thing that I find horse people do better than dog people. And that's really good clicker trainers and horse people understand arousal and understand the value of a delayed reinforcer more than a lot of dog people do. And I think if we collaborated on those things, it would be a real benefit to a lot of those kinds of dogs that are really intense around food, because I feel like all horses are really intense around food. So
that is such a good point. I almost read your mind. If you'd asked me to guess what you're going to say, it would have been something around that. So I totally agree. And I think that I've said before, that my horse training fed into my dog training and backwards and forwards a lot. And one of the best things I have with my dogs is a stand. Just hang around. I might go over there. Like, I will be posting video of this. I haven't finished it yet. It's in the process, but I'm trying to teach Sherlock a new reinforcer, which is a dead ball that will become alive and exciting when I've used the marker and he brings it to me. And so for that, I need a stay there while I place the ball. Otherwise, he's like, oh, she's got the ball. Fantastic. And I can hide it, but he knows, he can smell that ball. It's in my pocket and he knows what I'm going to do. So that ability to ask him to wait while I go place the ball, ready to be able to cue him for standing up, go get the ball, is so important. So I agree. I totally agree in that. Slowing down the feeding, moving away, and that. But I will tell you a massive shout out to Kay Lawrence, who she's quite scary to train with. Spade's a spade, but oh my goodness, her detail on anything like that is immense. That I cannot mention anything like that without mentioning her. I think she's just an awesome trainer. But yeah, I agree with you. In general, I think there's a lot of overexcited dogs that could be a bit calmer if people had to play with doing horses.
And it's less of a problem in dogs, right? Because like an overexcited dog might be bouncy, or it might bark, or it might be a little hot into the behavior. And a horse who does the same thing is now dangerous. So it's really, I think that's the big difference, is that I can't have a horse galloping up to me at full speed and then sliding stop into me because they got excited about the reinforcer. But if a dog runs into me coming into heel because they're excited and they slam into my back leg, it's cute. And so I think it's
Well, it's cute if Maeve does it. It's cute if Sherlock does it. It's slightly less cute if Cosy does it. And yeah, if they're a Rottie or something, definitely not
right.
cute. And I think that's the thing. Depending on your dog or the type of horse you've been used to working with, you accept more or less danger in your life, don't you?
And I think I have way too much experience with horses to be okay with any level of danger. Like I just don't,
Yeah,
I don't like it.
it's not worth it. No.
So without understanding reinforcers and food, I think using it badly is bad.
Yeah.
Way more so than using food badly in dogs tends to not create the kinds of serious issues that I see in
Yeah.
horses.
Yeah.
And that's just, I think it's just a learning curve. I think it's like a group learning curve, and the horse world just needs to step away from horses for a minute sometimes and look at what other people are
Yeah.
doing in the great
Yeah.
wide
I
world of
agree.
other animals. It's just that when you have a horse, your whole life is a horse. So
Yeah, it
hard
is.
to
Yeah,
get
and
out of that.
it's interesting, isn't it? Because when I go to the conference in May, a quick shout out, the IABC Foundation conference, which is in Colorado Springs, May 9th to 11th. On the 8th, you can come and watch us do practical stuff. That I love, because once my horse stays out of the way, I have 2 whole days of dogs that I can chill. Gabriel can't because he has to do a general one as well to earn his crust. I get to have 2 days off and do all the dog stuff and make copious notes and think how I'm going to apply that. And so I think it's important that we hang around each other, but I don't see enough dog places like the IABC Foundation or the IABC themselves as well doing the cross-species stuff, because I think it's really, really interesting.
It is interesting, and I think it's a shame that we don't do more of it. But I think too, it's just that horse culture is such a thing, and that when you own a
Yeah,
horse, it's a lifestyle. You're around other people who own horses. It's hard
yeah,
to kind of get out
yeah,
of that box. And so,
yeah. You've got to have the
especially if you're
gear
doing
and
it
yeah,
professionally or semi-professionally, like you're in that industry, and so it's hard to step out of it and see what else is out
yeah.
there.
Good point.
But there's some cool things out there.
Yeah,
Got to step away
definitely.
from it sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was our last question for this time. We would encourage people. I can have Katrina back on, or if it's sort of a really, really boring question, no, they never are. They're really great. I can answer it myself,
It's a
But it's
really
always fun
boring.
to bounce ideas, I think, off people. And Katrina's a brilliant bouncer of ideas. So I love that. And so, yeah, if anyone's got questions, do give us a shout, because it's really useful to have a structure to talk around, and the more information you can give us as to why you're asking the question, the better. So Pages was brilliant because it had a lot of background, even for me who doesn't know a thing about hunters over your neck of the woods. I got the idea, so that was absolutely brilliant. So a massive thank you for being here again, Katrina, and remind us
Thank you
where we
so
can find
much.
you. Leviosa, go on, tell us your
So
stuff.
my equine website is leviosaequine.com, and you can find me and all my info there. And you can also follow me and Samwise on Instagram at leviosaequine.
Yeah, follow her on Instagram. There's always some really cute little videos of Samwise doing some fab stuff, which is really, really nice. I love it. Yeah, it's brilliant. So thank you for joining us today. Be kind to your horses and have fun training, because remember, if it isn't fun for both of you, there's just no point doing it. And we'll see you somewhere on the internet soon. Bye.
Bye.
I'll just leave